Hey everyone, so last week I made a video critiquing the Egghead arc, and I went over some of the concerns I had, but purposefully omitted discussing one key aspect of the arc, and that was the Kuma Flashback. Now, the reason why I left it out was because I think it's worthy of receiving its own video where I can really flesh out my thoughts. So, here's that video. So we're only a couple of months removed from Kuma's backstory, and already I've heard people say that it's the best backstory in the series, comparing it to the O'Hara flashback or Mont Blanc Noland and Calgara. And while I personally don't think it's on that level, I can understand the reasoning for people saying that. Kuma's flashback is without a doubt the most ambitious flashback in the series. It's the first flashback that kind of goes through the entire life of a character. Literally from birth to death, we see Kuma's entire journey from kid in Sorbet Kingdom to becoming a slave, a revolutionary, a king, a warlord, and then finally as a test subject for Vegapunk. Without a doubt, the most ambitious story that Oda has told in One Piece as of yet. But does ambitious mean good? When I read through the story week to week, and then when I went back and read it in full to prepare for this video, I couldn't help but feel like there were too many cracks in the story for me to fully enjoy it. Now, what I'm mainly referring to are key moments in the story where Oda either skips pivotal scenes or outright doesn't answer what are very relevant quandaries presented in the story. The first example has to do with the God Valley section of the flashback. Once Kuma eats the pawpaw fruit, he talks to Saturn about how he wants to save as many people as possible. Immediately after this, we cut to the Sorbet Kingdom where Kuma is sitting alongside Ginny and Ivankov, with Ivankov stating that Kuma saved over 500 people. Not only is it disappointing to completely skip this entire rescue/escape attempt, but skipping it raises a few questions. For starters, how did Kuma save the slaves? Did he send them to another island using the devil fruit? This is the most obvious answer, but it's unclear how comfortable he would be using these newfound powers. Previous instances of kids eating devil fruits like Momo and Luffy have shown that people don't just implicitly know how to effectively use their devil fruit powers. So understanding exactly how Kuma used his powers to save the slaves is pretty important, especially considering how many dangerous people were on the island causing chaos. But even if we look past the rescue mission, how did Kuma himself escape? Now the obvious answer again might be that he used the pawpaw fruit, but geographically this doesn't make sense. God Valley is in the West Blue, and the Sorbet Kingdom is in the South Blue. These two seas are divided by the red line. We know Kuma can't use his devil fruit to get past the red line because he literally couldn't even do so in this very arc. When trying to reach Bonnie at Egghead Island, Kuma had to warp from Kamabaka to the red line, then climb the red line before warping to Egghead. If Kuma couldn't get past the red line now, there's no way a child Kuma could. The only reasonable conclusion I can come to is that Kuma, as a child, climbed the red line with Ivankov and Ginny on his back, which would be absurd considering we saw how big of a struggle that was for adult Kuma, what with all the Marines trying to shoot him down. An alternative is that he hitched a ride on a boat, maybe at Sabaody, that sailed through Fishman Island, which is also hard to believe considering how dangerous it is to take your ship underwater, even for the most experienced of navigators. It's still technically possible that he found someone generous enough to give them a ride, but the point I'm trying to make is less so how you can logically explain what happened, and more so that it's just unsatisfying to not get to see how Kuma made the trip. We shouldn't have to fill the gaps in the story, it should all be laid out for us to understand exactly what transpired. What makes this all the more frustrating is that in this very arc, we are shown how difficult it is for Kuma to travel across the red line. He had to use the devil fruit from Paradise and climb the red line from there. He was bombarded by Marines on the way and confronted Akainu at Merijoa, where part of his face was blown off, and then he teleported away to reach Egghead. Why go through the trouble of showing this Herculean effort Kuma takes, only to undercut it by skipping over the journey at God Valley? One last thing I want to bring up is the common assumption that we'll return to the God Valley flashback to see it through the perspectives of the Rocks and Roger pirates. This is almost certainly true, It's even possible that we'll see Kuma, Ginny, and Ivankov interact with some of these characters in the background, helping us fill in these gaps in the narrative. But the problem with this is that the moment will have passed by then. We shouldn't have to wait for integral moments in Kuma's story to be delivered in piecemeal. The best time to show the experiences of Kuma is during Kuma's flashback. At this point, I wonder if it was a mistake to include Kuma in the God Valley flashback to begin with. It's starting to feel like we have another Kaido situation, where Oda is restraining from showing too much of the character's backstory because it would reveal too much about Rox. At this point, I really hope the wait for Rox's reveal is worth it. The next question I had has to do with King Bakori. On 2 occasions, we're shown him tormenting the people of Sorbet. The first time, he's thwarted by the revolutionaries. Then years later, he comes back. This time, Kuma takes him down single-handedly in what was known as the Solo Revolution. But, like clockwork, Bakori rises again, this time with a marine fleet backing him. Why the hell are people letting Bakori escape? If Dragon and Ivankov aren't gonna kill this guy, isn't there a prison at Sorbet that we can put this despot in? When Bakori keeps returning, it doesn't make me as a reader want to see him get taken down again. It just leaves me frustrated that our central characters in this story aren't smart enough to deal with him definitively. Now, just like with Kuma going over the red line, you could write your own headcanon with this. Maybe Dragon and Ivankov did imprison Bakori. After all, we literally followed up their arrival at the warring nation with a scene of Kuma and Ginny in a prison cell. The implication may have been there if you really think about it. And perhaps when Kuma enacted his solar revolution, he was just such a nice person that he let Bakori go. After all, this would further show how Kuma is such a pacifist, which by the way is literally the name of the chapter when the revolution was shown. But this is all just headcanon. Why should it fall on the reader to try and make sense of this glaring omission from the story? Wouldn't this backstory feel more complete if we knew exactly how Bakori was able to escape? As it stands, I find Bakori to be a major low point of the Kuma flashback. Moving on to probably the most baffling part of the flashback. In chapter 1102, Saturn gives a strict order to Vegapunk to erase Kuma's individuality, and he makes it clear that he'll know if Vegapunk deceives him. He also asks that Vegapunk put a self-destruct mechanism inside Kuma. All of this to prevent Kuma from going rogue. Literally in the same chapter, in the next page no less, Kuma asks the scientist to program him to protect the Thousand Sunny, after the Paramount War reaches its conclusion. As we already know, Kuma spent the next 2 years protecting the Straw Hat's ship. There is no logical explanation as to why Saturn couldn't have just activated the self-destruct button. Kuma had clearly gone rogue as he began to attack Marines that wanted to destroy the ship. Beyond that, this showed clear insubordination on Vegapunk's part, and yet there is no word on if he was punished for his actions. And once again, if we enter the world of headcanon, who's to say that Vegapunk wasn't punished for his crimes? Maybe his budget was slashed so he couldn't build more inventions, which really would hurt the world government as a whole, but whatever. And maybe Saturn wanted to save pressing the self-destruct button for a more opportune moment, like when the revolutionaries took Kuma to their home base. This of course would assume that Saturn had some advanced form of future sight and was able to see such a great opportunity, but this is just fanfiction at this point. It's just absurd and honestly hilarious how Oda wrote Saturn being incredibly careful and observant of how Vegapunk would program Kuma, and then immediately have Vegapunk and Kuma basically say, yeah, let's just not listen to that old geezer, and actually get away with it. And now the last point is one that got a lot of fans upset, something that led to a lot of fan discussion on Reddit and Twitter, along with several One Piece YouTubers making videos on the topic. Why didn't Dragon save Ginny? After chapter 1097, we learn that Ginny, who's now the captain of the Revolutionary Army's Eastern Forces, has been captured by the world nobles. The following chapter clarifies that she was taken to be wed to one of the Celestial Dragons. Following this, I'd expect maybe an impassioned plea by Kuma to charge into Marijoa and save Ginny, followed by Dragon explaining why this would be a bad idea, as it would mean war with the world government, a war they would be woefully unprepared for, considering it had been established at this point that the army was lacking manpower and resources. This fear by Dragon would be justified. Kuma would then relent, realizing that maybe his selfish desires shouldn't supersede the army's goals to free the entire world of tyranny. This is just one way I could see this conversation playing out. It doesn't matter whether you'd agree that this is how the characters would or should react to the situation. Maybe you believe that Dragon being apprehensive would make no sense anyways, as Fisher Tiger single-handedly saved a bunch of slaves by attacking Marijoa. I don't really care either way. The point is, the story needs to address what Dragon and Kuma will do in response to Ginny's capture. Well, what actually happens in the story? So we see Kuma tiring himself out as he helps rebel forces win a war in some made-up kingdom that was just created exclusively for this chapter, clearly showing signs that he's using the war as an excuse to let out some pent-up frustration over the loss of his beloved friend. After this, can we expect that Kuma will return to discuss a potential plan of action to rescue their captain? Well, not really. In fact, we end up jumping 2 years ahead to when Ginny has already been released by the Celestial Dragons because she contracted a deadly disease. This moment to me is the culmination of my frustrations with this flashback. Too many times we skip past pivotal scenes that absolutely need to be seen for the reader to have a proper understanding of the narrative. Fans can make up whatever story they want, say that later in the story Dragon will be fleshed out and get his own backstory, and then we'll understand why he didn't save her. But that won't excuse the fact that the story left us in the dark when it mattered most. I saw Mr. Morge's video about how no one understands Dragon, and he makes an interesting point about how Dragon could be very similar to a Viper from Skypiea. Someone who definitely believed in sacrificing oneself to the cause of the rebellion, no matter what. This would explain Dragon's seeming lack of desire to save Ginny. He then discusses how it's actually immoral to risk the army's success just to save a single slave, when there are several other slaves that they have been working to save for years. While these are all good points, I wish this information was conveyed during the flashback. All in all, the Kuma flashback was a mixed bag for me. While there were some incredible highs, there were also some really confusing moments. I find it to be really frustrating because if Oda had filled in those gaps in the story as it relates to Bakori, Ginny's capture, and Vegapunk disobeying Saturn, then I think this flashback would, no question, take the spot as the best backstory in the series. I know it can come across as me nitpicking throughout this video, but when so many details are left up to fan interpretation, I think that really detracts from the story. Well, that's gonna do it for this video. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe if you like the video and want to see more. I upload every week. And let me know in the comments, did you enjoy the Kuma backstory? Did you disagree with anything I said? I'd love to hear from you. Alright, have a good one.